I will show you some pictures that were published a lot. So they look like this. They're dramatic images. I worked mainly for the New York Times as a freelance photographer in Iraq and in Afghanistan for about 10 years. And among many others, I took these images. And I'm very happy with them. They're very dynamic and dramatic. And I took them and I'm proud of them. But they are also, in a way, predictable. If you look at images that are published a lot about war, you will always find similar patterns. There are always some sort of technical thing involved, like tanks. There are soldiers with uniform, there are weapons. So a lot of times these publications show us war in a way that we expect it to look like, which is not wrong, but it's, and that is my argument, it isn't predictable. It's something that we feel we already know. So I took this image in Iraq, but it's basically my Vietnam moment. We all know this image already. And we've seen it many, many times. And I just repeat it, and then it's printed, and we're like, huh, oh yeah, that's war. So I was very angry. And being German, being angry comes almost naturally. So let's do it like this. So I was told I should never, ever, ever, whatever happens, I should not leave this little carpet. I try, okay, I try. So I just did. I think you do get little electric shocks if you leave this carpet. They sent me a 20-page document with the rules. You know, guys, I never read it. Sorry, I'm busy. So. I was angry because a lot of the images that I took in Iraq and Afghanistan were never published. And amongst those were pictures that were too horrific to publish, that were too terrible for the publications. The publications did not dare to show them to you as the viewer. So I was, they made me angry. It made me feel like I didn't do my job properly, because my job is not just to take the images, my job is to ensure that the image is also published. So I started this little experiment, and the experiment looks like this. It became a very small, tiny book with pictures that are not my best pictures, they're not my most dramatic pictures from war. They are basically my most horrific pictures. And I went back through my archive, and I looked at all the most horrible pictures, and I put them in a little book. And I just wanted to see what would happen. And what happened was that people got really interested in that idea. And they looked at this book like a lot. And a lot of people, especially young people, told me that they were very impressed and they've never seen images like this before, which made me really worried, because I believe these images are important to see. Now, sorry. I'm the only one using a hand mic, so I don't know why. I did my book, and it was a big success. I was very happy with it. I chose the book as the context for this work. There was no exhibition. There was no online slideshow. These pictures didn't happen on social media. It was a book. That it had to be a book. It was really important that the context of this work is a book, because in a book, you have complete control. You only see text. You have complete control over what you want to see and how you want to see it and how fast you want to see it, and do you want to see it at all, or do you want to see it maybe 2 weeks from now or 2 years from now? A book is something that gives you, as the viewer, complete control of how you look at the images. So it had to be a book. Now the trouble with the book is, if I'm invited as the crazy person to an event like this, how do you show the book? Basically you can't, because you change the context. You change the context of how you show the work. And if you change the context with work that is so difficult, that is so hard to look at, which can basically backfire in such a terrible way, where people would just be shocked and would not be able to, or wouldn't have any chance to reflect on what they've seen, then that would be disaster. So I was invited last year to quite a similar event. And they said, well, we're going to show the book in a loop. It's like an endless loop. And they had a huge screen, 6-meter screen, and they wanted to show these images, 6 meters, as a loop while we had a nice conversation on the stage. And I said, no, please don't do that. It's not fair. It's not right. You cannot bombard these people with these images. They have to decide what they want to look at, not the organizers of the event. So they said, well, we figure something out, and we always do it like this, so we have to do it like this. And I said, oh, Jesus. So it started like this. So this is actually the original slides that they showed. And the first picture, I thought, okay, well, I guess that's going to be interesting, what will happen next. And that's what happened next. So they decided to censor the book. And first I was laughing. I was like, I mean, you can't do that, can you? And then I was quite angry. And then I thought, this is brilliant, because it solved my problem. You can show the book without showing the images, without forcing you to look at the images, without, trapping you in this situation where you either close your eyes or run out of the room. So you basically can show the book, you can explain what the intention was, without showing the actual images. So they showed the whole book like this. Sometimes it wasn't necessary, apparently, to censor, and sometimes it was. So they had the assistant of the person who organized this just hold up little pieces of paper in front of the most horrific parts. And I thought, it's brilliant, because sometimes you have to do a lot and sometimes not a little. So I thought, what does the person who did this think is most horrific? What is worth covering and what is not worth covering? So I thought it's a good way to actually show the work, which is so much about self-censorship. The basic idea and the main idea of this book is self-censorship, and this is exactly what this person did with my book. So it's, I couldn't have imagined it. It's too good. It's too brilliant. So sometimes, it was everything. Now, I have a few books with me, so later you can actually look at the book. It's much more important than to see this strange slideshow here. I do have an epilogue in the book, which I can show the uncensored version of, and it goes like this. I have a grandfather, and his name is Dr. Adolf Bangert. So my grandfather was a believing Nazi until the day he died, and I got to know him when I was a kid. And when he was talking about war, he was telling these very positive adventure stories about war. They were riding around with their horses. There was, they were very close to each other as soldiers. But it was all very positive, like an adventure story. And only much later, I realized, when I went to cover wars, when I worked as a photographer in conflict areas, how much he had actually censored himself, how much he had lied to himself, and also how much he lied to me, basically, telling me these adventure stories. And so I included him as an epilogue in the end of the book, to show, to have a rather painful personal example from my family of somebody who had really self-censored himself, but then if it's almost meant as a warning, if you combine the self-censorship that we all have in us with the state ideology, like the Nazi ideology, this can be actually very dangerous. So we should be really, really careful with our self-censorship. So the book has a design feature, which is quite unique. Some of the pages in the book are closed, so you have to open them with a knife or letter opener, and you actually have to do something. You have to actively decide if you want to open these extra pages or not. So the idea is to remind the viewer of his and her responsibility to make that decision. What do I want to see? What is important? What do I have to see? Okay. That was the first part. Now the second part. Thanks for staying with me through the serious matter. There's a second set of images that is rarely published. And I had a folder on my desktop while I was traveling in Iraq and Afghanistan, which was called Weird Pictures. So whenever I encountered weird pictures during my practice, which was surprisingly often, I would dump the pictures in that folder. And so after publishing the war porn book, I felt there's another very important aspect of war that is underreported, that is really not considered enough, and that is absurdity. So I made a book full of these strange pictures that were created in war zones. And interestingly, there was more acceptance in the public for the first book than the second book. People were really, really irritated with the second book because you don't laugh about war. War is something, and war is something terrible. We should do everything we possibly can to avoid armed conflict. But then at the same time, war is something deeply human. It always happened, and we will always make war, and there will always be some sort of daily life in war, and there will be always something to laugh about in war also. And it's much harder to explain this than to explain the war porn book, because the war porn book, everybody can imagine that this is somehow horrible, but that war can be, filled with daily life and with laughter is really hard to understand. He was looking for the holes he was supposed to have created and couldn't find them. This is one of Saddam Hussein's horses. He had a huge horse collection, and all the horses were killed or ran away or they were eaten or something. And so this is one of the very few surviving horses of Saddam Hussein. I was quite surprised to find all these posters of paradise and beauty in these places. So this poster I found in a medical aid station set up by the Iraqi army. They had very little supply, they had terrible wounds coming in, trauma patients. It was quite horrific, but they had these posters up of paradise. This is in Afghanistan, and I was traveling with the German military, and the German Bundeswehr is probably the only military in the world who goes to battle with a foldable toilet. And they have regular paper and wet tissue paper. Right. This was a war memorial in Baghdad created by an Italian architect in the 80s for Saddam Hussein. Some among you might know this plant. Yep, marijuana all over the place. Southern Afghanistan, the young soldiers, they're like 19, foot patrol through like fields and fields and fields of marijuana, endless. They thought it was very cool. But this stuff is actually produced for the local markets, and the biggest buyer of this material is the Afghan army, and they're always good fun. So this, it was really the official symbol of this unit was the rainbow. The other soldiers from the other units thought it's quite funny. This is in front of a palace in Tikrit in Iraq during a ceremony. And yeah, I always like it. It's like war as a theater play. So to come back to why I'm here. So what is war really like? Well, I'm actually not quite sure, but I think war is more complicated than we maybe think. War can be more funny than we think. War is definitely more horrible and horrendous than we think. And I think we should try to do a better job to give you an honest picture of what war can look like. Thank you.